Motherhood in Motion,
the podcast for mothers with ambition.
Welcome everyone to Motherhood in Motion. I'm Anushka DeLuca, founder of Nannies and More, and mother of 3 kids under 4. This podcast, as you all know, is a podcast for ambitious mothers navigating both family and career on their own terms. Constanze and I run research on this. So far, we've had 2 waves. The first one, 180 professional mothers in the UAE talking about the impact of motherhood on their ambition and what gets in the way. Since then, we've done a second wave to explore the impact of the current context on mothers in this current geopolitical situation.
And my name is Constanze and I'm the founder of Both And, a platform on Substack for mothers with ambition, where we write weekly about these topics. And for me, it's super exciting to have Harriet today on the call because we have been following her journey in the last year or two, seeing all these interesting endeavors that you're on, all kind of different topics you're working on, from coaching to couples to everything. I also know you have kids, so you are really like a mother with ambition, and I think that's why it's so amazing to have you on this call. Also, you were impacted by the last, let's say, 2.5, 3 months, and that's why we're super excited to have you to just understand, what did this do to you, to your career, to your ambition. But before we go into that, maybe just a little bit about you, like who are you? How do you come into this podcast, and everything around you to understand who you are as a person, a mother, and an ambitious mother after all.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. And this conversation's been rescheduled a couple of times due to things that have been going on in the region recently. So I'm pleased we're finally getting to have this conversation. And I just, again, thank you for this podcast, and I think just talking about ambition alongside motherhood. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I just think it's amazing that you are curating these kind of conversations for me, because it's super important. So I'm thrilled to be here. So I guess just to introduce myself, so I'm Harriet. I'm a mum of 3. I'm based in Dubai, which is genuinely home for us. My background prior to having kids was in corporate, in ad tech. I spent years climbing the corporate ladder before I walked away from it to ask a much harder question, really about what I actually wanted to build and why. Then I moved from there into a kind of coaching and therapy space, and my work has really evolved over the last 7 years, but more particularly in the last couple of years. I have foundationally worked a lot with mothers. These days, I actually mainly work as a strategic advisor to sort of founders and leaders and CEOs on values-led leadership. I also run a women's wellness community called the Connected Collective, and I have co-founded a wellness community and editorial newsletter called The Wellness Drop. Most of what I do in some shape or form comes back to the gap between what looks successful from the outside and what actually feels aligned on the inside, and how women in particular navigate that. Hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and that's exactly what we're
Absolutely.
looking into.
In fact, digging a little deeper, I'm on your listserv, and I was looking at some of the last few that I had received, and it feels so relevant right now, especially to this conversation. The modern expectations of women, the nervous system regulation in the context of everything that is happening right now. And what actually has been really interesting for us to see as well is you are someone who has not shied away from pausing something that is not working in the moment, coming back to it when it makes sense. I know you've spoken about the Wellness Drop and other things. I was looking also at the Growth Collective. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that sounds extremely relevant to our audience.
Yeah, sure. So the Growth Collective is part of the Connected Collective. So I started the Connected Collective about 4 years ago, and I started it here in Dubai because it was really the community that I couldn't find. I think we're all expats here, right? It's very easy to come into an expat community and meet people, but it's actually often very difficult, particularly as a woman, to find your people. So I started that community, really, it started as a book club, as a self-development book club. We would read a different kind of book on personal development or growth or spirituality every month. But what I really wanted that space to be was a very safe space for women to come and to put down everything that they carry, to forget all of the roles that they have, all of the hats that they wear, and just connect back into themselves, back into their bodies. We would do a different wellness practice every month, which was always very somatic based. So yin yoga, Reiki, breath work, very slow, not with the intention of stopping, because actually stopping feels very difficult and can be very hard actually for women, particularly in a, particularly if you are, a working mother, or, even if you just live in a city like Dubai, right? Naturally the environment and the energy of this place is very intense. I'm sure that's a lot of the reason why a lot of us live here, right? There's so much opportunity here, but it can be very, very difficult to find the kind of off switch. So I wanted to create an environment where women could just come and kind of decelerate, just sort of learn to just take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit. So everything kind of community based that I run in Dubai now, well, the retreats, I'm heading off on a retreat in 2 days. Everything kind of grew from that original purpose, which was to create a space and a container for women to connect with other like-minded women, but more importantly to connect with themselves, which is just something we just we don't do on so many levels, particularly in motherhood, right? There's so much noise from the world for women, right from when you're girls, right, about being polite and not ruffling feathers, and this looks different culturally based on your culture of origin. But also it's fairly universal, right? We are taught to look outwards, and that kind of manifests itself in a number of different ways as we get older. It manifests in, obviously we're talking about ambition specifically in this podcast, but going to uni, getting the degree, getting the job, getting the title, and this is why a lot of my work and my own story, when I came into motherhood, the whole thing just came crashing down because that expectation reality gap was so vast, and it was really it was such a calling for me to just kind of look inward for once and understand actually not what do I want, who am I, what kind of mum do I want to be, so kind of all of those things on that side. But then also on the other side, we also just don't listen to our bodies. We are just on the go all the time. So that was kind of why I started those communities, was really a very values-led part, helping women understand what drives them, what matters to them, what are the things that they need in their life. Forget what your neighbor or your that influencer on social media values, and what do you want? What do you want for your life? What do you want to teach your kids? And then also what do you need from a kind of body perspective, from a somatic perspective? Let's just stop, listen to ourselves. So I used to call myself a holistic life coach, because it's I've got a mic here with a tripod, right? But that's exactly what it is. There's this kind of biopsychosocial, legs of the tripod. You can't just, you can't just be looking at one of them. They all have to work together in harmony.
I love this because it kind of links back to, I love your inward outward thinking. And I see this with myself, right? A few years ago, even someone told me, you're constantly looking outward, look into yourself, what do you feel, what do you see? And this also, although it might be counterintuitive, helps you connect with people easier, and actually helps you to set your boundaries and have an easier communication and easier collaboration with people around you, which I never really saw before. So I really like it. What I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned the retreat you're going to go on in 2 days. So there's a big thing coming up for you as well. So first of all, what is the retreat about? What are you doing there? But the other one is also, you have kids. So how are you managing this all? How does your day look like? How do you manage your ambition and motherhood at the same time, whilst not losing yourself in the process?
Great question. So, firstly, the retreat is one of my retreats. It's a connected collective retreat, and my retreats all have very different themes, but they all have kind of one core purpose, which is exactly what I sort of just mentioned, which is helping women just connect into themselves. Some of them are a little bit more, some of them are, themed particularly around the nervous system. So we'll do nervous system education and very kind of deep nervous system practices. Some of them are a little more based around self-worth. This one coming up is in Ibiza, and it's actually it's the second. I ran one last year, and it was called Pause and Play. And the reason why it was called that was because actually, as women, we're pretty bad at doing both of those two things, right? We're pretty bad at pausing, and we're actually pretty bad at playing. So all of my retreats are, again, I started the retreats again because they were the retreats that I couldn't find. I was going on a lot of wellness retreats, and they were amazing, but you were kind of scheduled back to back to back in workshops. If I'm taking like 2-3 days away from my kids, I want to lie by the pool and like have a glass of wine and just chill, whilst also kind of, learning some amazing things and doing some very restorative practices. So there's different kind of tenets of my retreats, but it's always about, there's no restriction. They are, a workshop every morning and a workshop every evening. And then generally the days are free for you just to kind of relax. We do private sessions. So this one in Ibiza is very much, we're doing a lot of kind of, obviously, given where we are right now, collectively, globally, there's a lot going on for people. So we did shift the agenda slightly. We are making it really a space where women can be held and just release actually a lot of what they've been holding for the last, certainly for the last few months. And then I think to your second question, so a lot of the work that I do as a coach is, I call myself a values-led coach, and I obviously touched on that in that what I mentioned earlier, but values for me was what changed, like 100% changed the game for me. I first did a values exercise just after I'd had my daughter, and I kind of use this phrase all the time, but I had my daughter 7 years ago, well, nearly 8 years ago now, and 3 months after she was born, my husband came home and was like, we're moving to Dubai and we're moving in a month, and we just basically packed up our lives and left. And I was this new mum. The day we landed, my husband went into work, and the whole experience was so like unstabilizing and unsettling for me that I basically had a breakdown. And I do call it now on reflection very much a breakthrough, because it was kind of the catalyst I needed to just go like, halas, this is like enough. We can't do this anymore. And values was kind of one of the first. I did a lot of things in that period, right? I did a lot of in-child work. I did a lot of traditional talk therapy, CBT, lots of different modalities, a lot of which I use in my own work now. But values was the piece for me that was like kind of just really the exercise of working out what are the principles in my life that make me me and that I need for me to be okay. So that exercise forms the basis of everything I do. And then I really, from a motherhood space, what really kind of compounded on that was when I found the work of Dr. Sophie Brock. I don't know if you've come across her work, but she's a motherhood sociologist, so literally studies the sociology of motherhood. And I did her qualification, which was all around understanding the ways in which the societies, our cultures, our families, our upbringings, the messages that we receive from society heavily impact our experience of motherhood. And I just realized I was carrying so much that wasn't mine to carry. I just had all of these beliefs and shoulds around what a good mom should look like and should be. And it felt so alien. It was so not my version of motherhood. So I stripped all of that away, and I kind of went back to, okay, what do I want? What do I want to model to my kids? What kind of, what does purpose and meaning and fulfillment look like for me? So I think, just to bring this back to your question about motherhood, it was really that question that I was left sitting with after I had, left the corporate, left my corporate job. Because I left my corporate job when I had my child, because I realized, it wasn't aligned. It wasn't the life I wanted to be living. And I walked away from it. And that sounds clean and brave when you say it out loud, but in reality, it was disorienting because my ambition didn't go away. I'd given up the container for it, but the drive was very much still there. So the question that I was sort of left sitting with became like, what do I actually want to build and why? And underneath that, what do I want to model to my children? Because they're watching, right? They're not listening to what I say about purpose and meaning. They're watching what I do with my days and how I speak to myself. And I knew I didn't want them. I knew I didn't want to watch them grow up watching me chase something I didn't actually believe in. So, ambition for me now, whereas I think previously it used to be a lot more about output, it's now much more about alignment. And I think this is a topic like that I could go on about for days, but, ambition in motherhood, this is why this podcast is so wonderful, and that you're actually almost bringing those two terms together, because it gets such a bad rep. There is this lingering cultural idea that an ambitious mother is somehow choosing her work over her children, or that wanting more for yourself takes something away from them. And I truly believe the opposite of that is true. I truly, truly believe that modeling purpose, modeling self-respect, modeling what it looks like to build a life that you actually believe in, that's a gift to your children, not a trade-off. And I think also to say to that, right, if that looks like staying at home and raising your kids full time, amazing. You're modeling presence and devotion and the value of care work and the choice to send to your family. That's also ambition. Ambition isn't a job title. It's not a business. It's the decision to live a life on purpose, whatever form that may take. So, yeah, I think we shouldn't be questioning whether mothers should be ambitious. We should question the version of ambition that we've inherited, right? The one that's all about kind of proving. To me, ambition in its truest sense is one of the most generative forces a mother can bring into her home.
No, that was perfect and summarizes exactly what this podcast is about. We define ambition, reminded by the lovely Neha Rooch, that the definition is being determined to be really good at something. So, like you said, it could be being a very intentional parent and building something that is meaningful to you. And in fact, when those are aligned, you can be the best version of both of those things, right? As Constanze would say, both and. So this is exactly what the podcast is about. So thank you for that. And you also touched upon something really key here. I think that misalignment between values and like the performance of calm is something that, as mothers, we are constantly grappling with, right? Especially in this current context where so many of us have been holding this all together for our children, for our families. What would you say is the distinguishing point at which, it is just being tired and overwhelmed versus burnout and nervous system dysregulation?
Oh, it's a tricky question, because I think, look, everyone is so different. And, I think, again, it all really comes down to the level of disconnection that you have with your own body and, your own signals. I think we've been raised in a society where we are told to outsource everything, right? And we have just outsourced too much of our own wisdom and our own kind of our own knowing. So, it's a difficult question to answer, because I think only you really know what is normal for you. And, a lot of women who used to come into my practice or clients, would sort of just be like, traditionally, I've always worked with high functioning women, and, high achievers and what I still do, predominantly probably because I have always been one of those, and I see myself in those women, and, I'm not stressed. I'm fine. Like, I'm absolutely fine. And then you go and you kind of run a blood test, or I always remember, like, one woman walked, she was my client, and she was a very, very kind of senior in a very big corporate company, and had 2 kids, and very high functioning. And she was like, no, I'm absolutely fine. And then she one day just completely went blind in one eye. And she was going to all these optometrists, and like they were like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, there's nothing wrong with your sight. Like, we can't understand. And we worked together, and I recommended some somatic practitioners for her. There was some underlying trauma work as well that, needed to be processed. That is often a very big part of it. We kind of just shove everything down, right? It's like pushing a basketball, trying to push a basketball underwater, right? You can keep trying to push it down, but that thing's going to keep popping back up again. So at some point you have to kind of address, these things. So there's many layers of it, but for her, actually what was really the key for her was a lot of somatic work, was actually just resetting her nervous system, learning how to breathe properly, learning how to just, again, I don't want to say practice stillness, because that is really difficult when you are on the go all the time, but learning how to just decelerate, how to slow down, how to feel what she was feeling, how to actually acknowledge these sensations in her body and not just kind of pushing through it all the time. Because we all know this, right? Like, we've probably all heard of the book The Body Keeps the Score. Your body will whisper and then it will knock and then it will scream and then it will bring you to your knee. But I realized very quickly that there is actually only so much you can do by talking. You have to get deeper access to your brain and your body in order to heal, like fundamentally, and again, the same thing applies with, the first qualification I did was trained as a functional medicine health coach, because I had healed myself probably about 15 years ago now from some health issues through a functional approach. But if you can take all the supplements under the sun, all the peptides, all the supplements, if you have a nervous system that is stuck in survival mode and you're not sleeping, then it's not going to make a bit of difference.
And it's not something we're trained to do, right? It's something that many of us are kind of like, or we have been trained from society that it's not something we talk about, it's not something we look into, it's just about run. And I think in the current situation, even more, we needed to be calm for our children, we needed to maybe also do our job, we needed to be there for friends, we were like doing all kind of stuff, and I felt sometimes having a little bit of just a break to think about what is actually happening and how this is affecting me and the family was really helpful. And additionally, what we realized in the last months is that for many people, no matter if you would leave the country or stay in the country, the systems kind of changed. So you would not have the same system in place in what you had on the 27th of February. And Anushka sent me a message, I think 2 days after we started or 3 days after the war started. And she said, remember last week what kind of life we had? I was like, yeah, it was very different. I agree.
Yeah, no, I was right there with you.
All of a sudden, you were doing all kind of things you never imagined you would do. But also what we realized is that women, whether they left the country or not, a lot of things fell on them again. Yeah. Like we saw it in the first survey already, that a lot of the daily and day-to-day tasks and load is all on women, but even more now when the systems changed, like the default person to take care of it was always the women and the mothers. And I know you are trained on fair play and you're kind of talking about these kind of things. Did you kind of apply this in your own life during this time? Did you help clients go through this with this and book? Or do you even, can you just explain what it is? Because I think we have read it, but not everyone has read it.
Sure.
And how did you use it the last months, maybe?
Yeah, so I think for sure when I became a mother, I think the biggest shock for me was just how wildly different the gendered experience of parenting actually is. And I think how truly, truly unprepared you are, both of you, when you become parents. Like, I have a genuinely hands-on partner. He works from home. He takes on a huge amount of the execution of tasks, right? He shows up, he does the tasks, he's present. But even with all of that, the mental load on me as the mother is just so much heavier, right? The thinking, the anticipating, the remembering, the birthday parties, the holding of everyone's emotional weather, that like defaults to the mother in a way that I don't think we ever really fully acknowledge. And through my work with Dr. Sophie Brock, so again, the sociology of motherhood, I came across Eve Rodsky, who is really kind of the leading voice in this. So she wrote a book called Fair Play, which I think you have near you. And she designed a system really. So the book is fantastic. Yeah. I when I was doing my motherhood course, I basically was like, this is required reading for all of you. And I run Fair Play workshops now as a Fair Play facilitator. And like, you don't need to read the book to do the system. So she created a system essentially, which is, it's a card deck. Actually, I have it here, but it's a card deck, and it helps, firstly, it helps kind of visibilize the amount of tasks that generally fall to, she calls the she-fault parent, right? The default parent, e.g. the mother. Again, this is not always 100% of the time the case, but we do know cross-culturally that it predominantly is, particularly post-pandemic, where we have what's known as intensive mothering ideology is the predominant form of mothering. So it visibilizes that, but it also gives a system for fairer split of labour. I actually have a workshop about this. I'm happy to share it with any of your listeners, where I kind of actually go through the mental load and what it is, why you need to know about it, and also the fair play system. But what's so smart about her system is that she uses a model called CPE, and that's conception, planning and execution. Meaning if you hold a card as a parent, you don't just do the execution of it. You hold the conception, you hold the planning and the execution. So for example, my husband holds the kids activities cards. So I don't even know when those are. So he holds the conception. That means he deals with he books them in for the term, he pays for it. He's the predominant contact. He has to, when they go, he has to get their snacks, he has to get their water bottle, and then he takes them to the football, the gymnastics. I have nothing to do with it. Whereas often what happens is, a parent will go, that's fine, I'll take them, don't you worry. But the mum is still the one who's managing all the things, buying all the uniform, renewing the term fees. So it's a smart system. I highly, highly recommend it. Even if, I think one of the things that you kind of obviously alluded there to the different kind of scaffolding systems that we have in place, right? We are super, super lucky here in, here in the UAE that we live in a structure whereby, the scaffolding for, the practical scaffolding, right? Childcare, lifestyle, the village is more in place. But the mental load still exists in exactly the same way. So it's a really, really powerful tool. So I trained in that, and I mainly run that workshop at retreats. So I do couples retreats. And I think also whenever I'm talking about the mental load, by the way, I also always just want to caveat, that this isn't always necessarily a one-sided thing, right? Men carry their own version of the mental load. They have a huge pressure to be stoic, to be strong, to provide. Actually, when I ran my workshop, what was so amazing, I had so many men come to it, which was just wonderful because, and I was very kind of cautious to say, like, this isn't just about painting women as the only ones who carry something that's heavy. It's more about the fact that none of us have the language to describe what we're each carrying. And without language, you can't name it, right? If you can't name it, you can't share it. And if you can't share it, you can't shift it. And a lot of the work that I have chosen to do in my life over the last kind of 6 or 7 years is to help people see what they've been living inside of but haven't had language for. Whether that's a household dynamic, whether it's a value misalignment, at home or in a leadership team, whether it's a couple drifting in a marriage, the pattern is always the same, right? People don't always need more advice. In fact, people rarely need advice. They need a clearer mirror. That's the thread that runs through a lot of the support that I offer now.
You touched upon the couples retreat. I know someone who went to one of your couples retreats and has spoken so highly about it. And this is so relevant to our research. We have heard time and again from our data, but also the podcast about the role of a strong partnership in navigating uncertainty in a context like the one we're in right now, but in general, navigating parenthood, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about the couples retreats? What are some, key revelations that people leave with from these retreats?
Yeah, so the couples retreats, and I always again want to caveat, I'm not a couples therapist or a couples counselor. So these spaces are not that, right? From the outset, I'm always kind of just clearly marking that these are not spaces for couples in crisis. They are spaces for intentional couples who want to come and reconnect. Firstly, let's just be honest, when do you ever actually, especially when you're parents, and my couples retreats, by the way, are not exclusively for parents. When do you ever actually put time aside to remember who the two of you are? This particular retreat that I have coming up, it was supposed to be in April. It obviously got moved. So it's now been moved to end of November. It's in the Maldives. So that particular retreat, and actually weirdly, as is always the way, I think it was meant to happen, because I just think everything that couples are riding through right now, there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot people are holding, there's, a lot of instability, a lot of people asking really hard questions, like, should we stay? A lot of talking of values, right? Like, whether you know it or not right now, people are using their values more than ever. They are using their values as their compass. So, I think at the end of the year, it will be a perfect time for couples just to kind of come together to actually just have a hot minute to just decompress and be like, wow, what just happened this last year? And actually, I love you, thank you, we made it. Let's talk about what comes next. Let's shift out of, this has been a hard year. Let's look at what went right, and let's look at what didn't go so great. And what always forms, again, sound like a broken record, but values work always forms the basis of those retreats. And honestly, I think that work is transformational for couples, and it's always what people take away the most, because values work is 100% what has made my marriage stronger. It's very easy, particularly if you are partnered and you've been together a long time, you change as people, right? I'm not the same person. I married my husband nearly 10 years ago. I'm a completely different version of myself. And you need to be able to, often what I see with couples is you see couples come in and you can see this tension. There's this underlying resentment. And very, very often when you do a values exercise, it becomes immediately clear what the issue is. And most conflict that I see, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's at home, comes down to a values misalignment. It comes down to the fact that you value something that your partner doesn't, or something feels more important to you. So when you have that language, when you have that understanding, you shift into a different level of perspective, because you don't just see someone's actions, you see the motivations behind their actions. So the couples retreat has that as the foundation, and then this one is very much around visioning and goal setting. So it will be around kind of let's set the vision for the year ahead. What do we want to do? Again, all around your values. You do your individual values, and then you do your family values, and then you build your goals around that. But it's really just about being very intentional. And I know from my own marriage, and I know from, again, I'm not an expert, but just being intentional in your life with your partner and communicating. Couples drift because they've stopped communicating, and they've stopped understanding what matters to each other. It's not often because they don't love each other.
No, that was perfect. And I think you have really been doing what you said about giving us and our audience the language around so many of these things that I think a lot of us are thinking, but maybe haven't had the words to express. So thank you for that.
It's also something I link Harriet to because we had a session once with your values cards that you have, the deck that you have.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed it because it gives you something practical in your hand to actually look at the values and kind of also, it sounds weird, but to feel them. Like, does this feel right
Yes.
sitting
Yeah.
with you? And I actually changed my values based on that deck and based on that exercise slightly. And it was very helpful for me. So yeah, I can only tell everyone that you should get this deck because it's really, really nicely done, but also very, very helpful. And maybe just one last thing that I wanted to ask you, looking forward before we go to the end, how does your path forward look like? What are you looking into next? You have all these things planned, but is there anything that you would love to do, think about in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think I'm currently very much in I mean, obviously, maybe not so right now because obviously the kind of the predominant thread right now is just kind of holding steady. I think everyone started the year with, as they always do, right, with this like, yeah, year of the fire horse, like, let's go, like, let's set all these goals, and then everything just kind of imploded. And I am someone who very much I really need stability in my life. I don't do so well when the ground under my feet doesn't feel stable. And I think, even for people not like me, right, the ground feels probably a bit less stable than most of us would like. So I'm holding that truthfully. I'm kind of not going to pretend otherwise. Like right now, a lot of what I'm doing is actually the basics, just kind of keeping myself safe. And like when I say safe, I don't mean physically safe because I know I'm physically safe. I just mean emotionally safe. And, that's staying close to my inner circle, my kids, my husband, my dog, my closest friends. Um, and I think, I'm definitely evolving. I turned 40 last year, and I think there's a there's a weird thing that happens when you turn 40 that is so cliched because I was like, oh my God, this is really a thing. I'm like, I felt so different. I really felt like I shedded a complete layer of myself. I know who I am now in a way that I just didn't 5, 4, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago. And that gives me my own kind of stability. So I'm really focusing actually in this current season on not outsourcing stability, and finding it, really redefining my relationship with stability. One that doesn't depend on external conditions cooperating. Um, and I'm leaning on my values to do that, right? When everything around you feels uncertain, I'm just kind of keep coming back to what feels aligned. What would I do here if I were being honest about what matters to me? But I'm still building, right? I have hopefully something very exciting happening in the next few months, which you'll learn about soon. But I have my wellness drop business that is going really well, and I run that with my co-founder Katie. And yeah, I think one of the things that is interesting for me at the moment is I'm sort of navigating this kind of slight relationship between being visible and also being private. I've always been a very private person by nature. I've always kind of struggled with the idea of putting my life online as a way to be discoverable as a source of support. There was something about that always kind of never really sat so easily with me. And yet I've built work that in part requires visibility, right? So I've found myself navigating that tension for a while, but actually what's interesting is I think the direction that my coaching work is taking now is actually resolving some of it. A lot of the advisory work that I do now is with founders and CEOs is almost entirely word of mouth. And that kind of really suits me because it means the work sort of finds me, without having to sort of be the loudest one kind of shouting in a room. So I'm taking it day by day. I have a clear vision, but it's all built on my values. I know who I want to be. I know what I want to model. But right now, it's just one foot in front of the
Love
other.
that. Very well said. Lots to think about there. Great. So, maybe just to wrap up, if you could give our listeners one tip for maybe especially for women who are navigating uncertainty, dealing with some level of nervous system dysregulation given everything they're holding, especially in the current context, what is one tip you would leave us with?
I think just probably what I mentioned just then, right, is redefine your relationship with stability. It's because you have power and agency to find your own stability. I think it's very, very easy right now to just constantly be looking outwards for reassurance, checking the news. When I was away in the UK, I had to completely stop going on Instagram because it was really sending me into a dark place. So if you are struggling, first thing is audit your environment, 100%. What are you listening to? What are you watching? Sometimes your need to feel informed is at direct odds with your need to feel safe, and you have to feel safe first. So just prioritize that. Find something that works for you to just come back to yourself, whether that is sitting on the bathroom floor for 5 minutes and just like breathing, whether it is lying on the floor and putting your legs up against the wall for 10 minutes at night, whether it is finding a meditation. It's very different for everyone, but just try and find something that works for you, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, to just create that sense of safety within yourself. Because if you don't redefine that relationship, if you are constantly outsourcing it to the external environment, to people around you, it's just a hamster wheel that's very, very hard to get off. And I would say also, ask for help. Like, it's so totally okay to ask for help. I think, and I presume the most of your listeners are based in the UAE. We have the scaffolding here, right? To do it, we have the options, we have the we have the kind of the ability to actually sort of ask for help. So just allow that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Harriet. We really, really appreciated your insights today, giving us this essential language that is on top of our minds in navigating motherhood in motion. So really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.
Anushka and Constanze signing off on Motherhood in Motion. Thank you. Motherhood in Motion,
the podcast for mothers with ambition.